Hey, got a question about colons and Ruby, and got me thinking that that's a good topic to kind of talk about. And it's hard to not get too expansive here. I sort of, when I get those types of questions, I start thinking like as big as the net is, and then that leads down different rabbit holes. So I'm going to go into a Rails application that's phase four, and I'm going to look for some semicolons, and I'm going to talk about looking at documentation, kind of what I understand about semicolon use, and hopefully model some good behavior about answering questions, things you don't understand. So what I did is I got a review coming up later today. So I just got this project cloned. This is from a student, Andrew, who has already finished phase four, and I am using his expense or invoicing app as just a context to talk a little bit about colons. So I think one of the things that's confusing about Ruby is the Ruby has this sort of built-in flexibility, like you can put these symbols, don't put the symbols, write it this way, write it another way, and that's meant to, I don't know, I mean, flexibility is good, right? That helps you not have to be so rigid in how you do things. But also when you're looking at things, it can be like, well, why is it written like this? So I'll just start with a very simple example. I'm in the console here. Let me just exit and clear. Okay. So if I go into my Rails console, and let's say I'm looking at this line of code, this user.create. So when I say user.create, first of all, it doesn't let me do that with no arguments, because I've got validations in here, and if you're in phase three, then the validations don't come into play yet. But let's just look at my user model. Okay, so I'm inheriting from application record, and I've got some colons here. So I'm going to talk about this here in a minute. But in reference to what I was saying about symbols, if you think about JavaScript and where you started in this program, there's a difference between writing the name of a function and invoking the function. And in Ruby, we're not making that distinction, because user.create is the exact same as user.create open close parenthesis. And this is the first example in Ruby where the symbols don't matter. You put the parentheses, you don't put the parentheses, it doesn't matter. It's up to you. If we look at the validations, I need a username and I need an email, or I can't. Oh, and I need a password, or I can't make this user. So I need three things in order for this to work. So I can say user.create name, username, Benji, email, benji@gmail.com, and then I need a password. I want to say password. So at this point, this line of code should work in terms of creating a user. And I want to point out that the way I wrote this is one of, I don't know, probably like 6 ways that I can think of off the top of my head to write this. First of all, I don't need the parentheses. So if I take this off and I press enter, it should work the same way, because like we said, Ruby doesn't really care whether you have parentheses or not. Now, it didn't work because there's a uniqueness here that I'm failing, but it worked syntactically to say we want to create a user and these are the key value pairs. Second point, let's go back to putting the parentheses in, because I think it's useful to see that we're invoking this create method for the user class, and we're passing in an argument. What is the argument? We're not passing in 3 arguments. We're actually passing in 1 argument. And again, Ruby is allowing us to get away with not putting symbols. So there's implicit symbols here that are the curly braces, because what we're really passing into create is one argument, which needs to be a hash. So this is the name in Ruby of the key value pairs. So this hash has 3 key value pairs: username, email, and password. And that's what user.create is expecting. It's expecting a hash of information to be provided to it. So when I look at the seeds file and I look at this, I'm reading these 3 lines. I'm going to take this parenthesis, put it down here. These 3 lines as a hash, essentially. But we don't write the curly braces just because Ruby lets us get away with it, and it's faster to not write those. Easy to forget. You would do the opening one, and you got to do the closing one, so we don't need to write it. Let me quickly point out that in Ruby, there is another way of writing hashes, which is, instead of saying the key and then the colon and then the value, we can write the symbol So I can say, oh, I have the symbol username, which points at the value of Jimmy. I have the symbol password that points at the value 1234. And I have the symbol email, which points at the value Jimmy@gmail.com. So this is another way to do the same thing. So let me prove that to you by doing user.create with the parentheses, put in the hash, close this up, press enter, no problem. So that's the first thing about colons in the front versus colons in the back in Ruby, is that a lot of times it really is just a reflection of a different syntax and choice in terms of whether we're using the key value pairs, which is more kind of reminiscent of JavaScript, versus using this sort of symbol with a pointer at a value. So let's talk quickly about symbols in Ruby. So there's a data type called symbol. And this is somebody's blog. Let's go to something a little more official. Here's the class symbol. Objects represent names and some strings inside the Ruby interpreter. Generally using the name, string, little syntax. Okay, I mean, documentation can be a little hard to read. Public instance methods. Capitalize, downcase, empty, length, next, size, slice. It's pretty interesting because if you think about this compared to the string class, there's actually quite a few fewer methods for the symbol class than there are for the string class. So a lot of times Ruby, and you'll see this in Rails, they'll use the symbol of something to represent a method or an attribute. Let's look at an example of that. So let's go back to the user model. So has many invoices. What does has many invoices do? Well, one thing it does is that it allows us to say, let's find a user object. And then because of this line of code, we're able to say user1.invoices, which goes out, runs this SQL operation. It says, get all of the invoice records. So it's looking at the invoice table, but it's looking where the user ID is 11, which is because I just took the last user and the last user has an ID of 11. So this method comes from this line of code. One thing that is not clear to me is it actually the case that this line of code is identical to this line of code? I don't know the answer to that, so I'm going to find out. This one I don't need. I'm going to exit. I'm going to do Rails C. I'm going to come back in. I'm going to do user.last. I just want to see if it works the same way. Yes. So this really has many is a function, is a method that takes an argument, and this argument is a symbol essentially. So then my guess for the second one is that it's actually the same, obviously the same function, but this one takes a second argument. So it's an optional second argument, and the second argument is a hash. So in the hash, this is the name of the key, and we're giving it the value of the symbol invoices. So my theory is that this could be rewritten as through arrow and then invoices. All right, I have no idea if this is right. We could go look at the documentation, but what I'm modeling right here is a little bit of trial and error can go a long way. So let's see. Well, first of all, I didn't get an error when I tried to just load this up, which is a good sign. And second of all, I'm expecting this to still work the same way. Now, this isn't that interesting. User one dot invoices, user one dot clients. I'm just showing that it's not breaking, but I can also show that it works because I've done the seeding. So if I go to the first user, let me grab this u1 equals underscore, and then I'll do u1 dot invoices and actually gets something, and u1 dot clients should also get something. So the meaning of this is sort of, I think, obscured, or like the syntax is obscured by these missing symbols, right? The parentheses, you don't have to write them in Ruby, so they often see them left off. The fact that once you think about the fact that this is a method that's taking an argument, then you're like, oh, well, this comma should indicate that I have a second argument. And the same logic applies here. Validates is a method. I'm passing in an argument for username. That's just saying this is the column that I'm going to validate. And then this thing is the hash, which represents the thing that I'm doing. And I suspect that we could combine these two lines into one line and say, well, I want presence true, but I also want uniqueness to be true. So I can simplify this into one line of code. Okay. So again, I'm just sort of logically putting pieces together. I don't actually know that this is the way it works. But again, because Ruby has this no parentheses needed thing, I put the parentheses in, then I'm like, okay, well, this thing is the first argument. The second argument tells me what to do, and maybe I can put multiple key value pair attributes together to kind of make my hash list of rules that go with this particular column. All right, let's see if it works.